We're talking about hate speech and, and this being unfettered on the airwaves, unchallenged. And I'm just making a case of double standards, looking at folks who have crossed some sort of line, who came under fire and found themselves being shut down. Buju Banton has a song, Boom Bye Bye. To this day, he can't perform in the Bay Area without it being shut down because people said his song, even though he did it when he was 15, coincides or has incited people to go after the gay community, gays. And, and if people feel that way, I mean, okay, you're shutting him down. Why aren't these other people being shut down? We saw that NWA, when they did the song F the Police, were forbidden to do it in municipalities or venues that were patrolled by those police.
Right.
They got a letter from the FBI condemning the song, and then police departments were sending the lyrics to, while they were on tour to the upcoming city to let them know this was happening and they weren't allowed to do this.
And Davey, I don't know how we answer this question. I mean, where do you cross the line? Like, when is somebody inciting hatred and violence and when aren't they? But, F the Police gets banned, but Glenn Beck every day gets on his TV show and he's like, F the government, Right. He's like, F the IRS, F the Federal Reserve. He spins these...
Another example was the IRS guy, Joseph Stacks, who flew into a building being, enraged by a lot of this rhetoric. I don't know if it was more Glenn Beck or maybe Alex Jones, who was in Texas, where we're at a lot. But he flew into an IRS building and killed somebody, a 20-year veteran of the Army. I'm Vernon, I'm forgetting his last name. I'm going to remember it in a minute. But let me ask you this, John Hamilton. We're talking about Glenn, but there's also other people that's out there.
Right.
Can we talk a little bit about Alex Jones? Because this is another guy that's influenced people. We know about the shooting in Pennsylvania where 3 cops were killed, and that particular individual was a big fan of Alex Jones.
That's right. Alex Jones, for people who don't know, is sort of he's a cult hero on the internet. He's a conspiracist. He's constantly cranking out stories about how, there's a new world order, there are black helicopters, the government is setting up FEMA concentration camps, these kinds of things.
For a lot of our listeners, his big claim to fame would be the Obama deception, which includes KRS-One and Professor Griff in that footage. A lot of people have watched it. The concern that we have when we're in Texas is that this man has real problems with brown folks, and a lot of the black folks featured in his footage don't really know that. But you talk to folks in Texas, they're like, this man really hates us. He's on some, let's get him out the country type vibe.
Yeah, and exactly. And of course, Byron Williams himself, a racist from all the information that we have. And in my conversations with him, that was clear. I mean, he was up in arms about the oil spill. He said, whatever happened to the spirit of the South and the Confederacy? I mean, here is a man who's no friend to black and brown people, and he admires this Alex Jones character. In fact, he was, even more than Beck, I think, a central media player in this guy Byron Williams' life. And you're right, you brought up the Pittsburgh police shooter. The guy's name was Richard Poplawski.
Right.
He was a white supremacist, a young man, like 22 years old, in Pittsburgh. He was in an argument with his mother. The police were called in, and he laid in wait.
Yes.
And did an ambush, shot 2 police officers immediately in the head, killed a 3rd officer, injured others in a shootout. Ultimately, like Byron Williams, they took him alive and later discovered that, he was a huge fan of Alex Jones. But also, like Byron Williams, the 580 shooter, he was a fan of Glenn Beck. In fact, he posted to a neo-Nazi website called Stormfront a YouTube video which was Glenn Beck discussing with Republican Congressman Ron Paul the possibility that the U.S. government was setting up FEMA concentration camps. Glenn Beck said, I doubt they exist, but if they do exist, that would be bad, and we'll cover it. We need to get to the bottom of this. Weeks went by before Glenn Beck finally covered the issue. So, here you have a character in Glenn Beck who, there's a huge crossover audience with some of these fringe conspiracy theorists like Alex Jones who are racist, and they're birds of a feather. Right. And these right-wing vigilantes, these lone wolf domestic terrorists, take up the message and they use the talking points that they hear on Alex Jones or they find on Fox News to justify their extreme behavior.
Where do we go from here? You as a journalist, how do you deal with that sort of thing? What should people be looking for? Because As a journalist, what I mean is that you put across your information, but it's countered or it runs alongside the narratives that are coming from people who are also able to reach, however many they may have in their audience, Glenn Beck, 3 million a day or what have you. And so commentary gets put in the same bucket as news. You're an investigative reporter, but that investigation and what it would take to go to these places and get this information is not seen in a different light than somebody like Glenn Beck, who's coming up and saying, I'm doing an expose and espouses a bunch of opinions, many of them false.
I don't even know where to begin. I mean, Glenn Beck is on a program, the Glenn Beck program, which appears on a network called Fox News. But it's a misnomer. He has very little to do with news. I mean, by any standard of journalism, right, when you take to the airwaves, you have a duty, a responsibility to go on there and tell the truth. And day after day, he's telling stories which simply are not true, that have no basis in fact. And he does it as a purported newsman. I would recommend, I don't know what the answer is, Davey, but I would recommend, for example, Color of Change here in the Bay Area. A great group, Van Jones helped to start it and some other folks.
Right, James Rucker.
Colorofchange.org. They have a campaign going called Turn Off Fox. These are the folks who went after Lou Dobbs over his xenophobia and his racism against immigrants in our country. And similarly, they are taking a look at Glenn Beck in particular and saying, here's a guy who is stirring up trouble, and do we really want him on our airwaves?
Something to think about. Let's take a listen to any more clips that we can as we get ready to close out. What do you want to leave people
Well,
with?
let's just think about Glenn Beck's words. We've heard his violent rhetoric. We've heard him continue to attack the Tides Foundation after the people who do good work over there were very nearly on the target end of a madman's guns. So let's go out with that madman, with another clip of Byron Williams describing Glenn Beck in his own words.
When you talk about how conservative values have been lost in this country, you were talking before about the liberal media. You're saying maybe Fox is the exception. Do you think Fox is worthwhile?
Well, I'm not going to say anyone is worthwhile. But it's really surprising. I would have never started watching Fox News if it wasn't for the fact that Beck was on there. And it was the things that he did. It was the things he exposed that blew my mind. I said, well, nobody does this.
Well, there you have it. He's incarcerated in Santa Rita here in the Bay Area. His name is Byron Williams, man who is on his way to shoot innocent people, lay in wait for them in San Francisco after being ginned up by a television commentator, Glenn Beck. I want people to think about the type of access and the type of privilege that has been afforded to people like Beck, while the public enemies of the world and others who had political statements were unduly shut down. X-Clan, we can go down the whole list. If you want to look at what the gangster rappers who may have more of a negative take on things, they've been shut down a lot on our airwaves, and even DJs. Myself included, when we did the interview with Barbara Lee, being the first one to talk about no to George Bush after 9/11, the next day we was off the air. Peace, see you later, we're out. And everybody else kind of had their little marching orders like, stick to the script. We're not going to be too political. Yet and still an outlet has allowed this sort of rhetoric to go unchallenged and unchecked. And who will be the next victim? We already have the Bill O'Reilly situation with George Tiller. Remember the abortion doctor? Here was, he did a crusade on him, and somebody came to a church and killed him. Went to a church to kill him. So this sort of thing is happening. I don't know what the solution is immediately, but I hope people's consciousness is raised up because in these hard economic times, and with the return of a lot of people coming from overseas, this is going to play out in ways that I don't think we've imagined yet. We're out for now. Peace.